The autumn moon hung swollen and silver over the Montana mountains, casting long shadows across the village of Millbrook. October wind carried the scent of pine and destiny through empty streets, while somewhere beyond the tree line, wolves howled their ancient song of mating and belonging. Everyone ran toward the forest tonight, everyone except Alara Vance. She stood at the window of her small cottage, watching figures rush past in the darkness. Young wolves, old wolves, desperate wolves, all of them pulled by the magnetic force of the mating ceremony, drawn by promises of fated bonds and destined love. Their footsteps echoed on cobblestones like heartbeats racing toward hope. Alara felt nothing. At 28 years old, she had missed 10 ceremonies, 10 autumns of standing apart while others chased their destiny, 10 years of choosing solitude over the chains she knew bonds could become. Her mother had taught her that lesson, not with words but with suffering, with slow withering under a bond that should have been beautiful but became a prison instead. Alara had watched her mother lose herself piece by piece to an alpha who saw his mate as property rather than partner. She had held her mother's hand at 16, while the woman who gave her life simply stopped breathing her will to live, crushed beneath the weight of a love that demanded everything and gave nothing back. That was the truth about bonds that no one spoke aloud at ceremonies. They could elevate or destroy, liberate or imprison. And Alara had decided long ago that she would rather build a life of purpose than gamble her soul on a destiny that might break her the way it broke her mother. So she turned away from the window and the distant howls of wolves finding their mates. She had herbs to prepare tinctures to bottle villagers who would need healing remedies when morning came. Purpose was enough, service was enough, solitude was safe. The knock at her door came just as she finished grinding chamomile into fine powder. Soft at first, then more urgent. Alara wiped her hands on her apron and crossed the small room, expecting perhaps a child with a scraped knee or an elder with aching joints. She opened the door to find emptiness. But then she heard it, a whimper fragile as morning frost coming from the direction of the village square. Alara stepped outside, wrapping her shawl tight against the October chill, and followed the sound through shadows that seemed to thicken with each step. The fountain at the center of Millbrook had run dry years ago, its stone basin now filled with fallen leaves and forgotten wishes. Beside it, a figure crouched in the darkness. Silver hair caught moonlight like spider silk. Thin shoulders trembled beneath a coat too fine for its tattered condition. An old woman lost and alone while the whole world chased destiny elsewhere. Alara approached slowly the way she might approach a wounded bird. The woman looked up at her movement, and Alara's heart cracked at what she saw in those pale blue eyes. Confusion so complete it bordered on terror. The desperate searching gaze of someone who had lost not just their way, but themselves. The woman's lips moved, forming words that came out as whispers. "Please, I don't know where I am. I don't know who I am." Alara knelt on cold cobblestones, her knees pressing into ancient rock. She could still hear wolves howling in the distance, could feel the pull of the ceremony like a tide trying to drag her towards some unknown shore. But this woman needed help. This fragile soul needed kindness more than Alara needed destiny. That was an easy choice. "You're safe now," Alara said, and the words felt like a vow. She removed her own shawl and wrapped it around the woman's thin shoulders, feeling ice-cold skin beneath her fingertips. "Come with me. I'll take care of you." The woman's hand closed around Alara's wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes, swimming with tears and confusion, searched Alara's face as if looking for something she had lost. Why everyone else ran past, they all ran toward the forest. Because some things matter more than ceremonies. Alara helped the woman to her feet, supporting her weight with practiced ease. And I was never very good at following the crowd anyway. The walk back to the cottage felt longer than it should have, the woman leaning heavily on Alara with each step. Her breathing came shallow and ragged. Her hands shook, even wrapped in Alara's shawl. But she was alive. She was here. And Alara would make sure she stayed that way. Inside the cottage, warmth from the hearth embraced them both. Alara settled the woman into her most comfortable chair, the worn armchair that had belonged to her grandmother. She built the fire, higher boiled water for tea, found blankets that smelled of lavender and safety. The woman sat motionless through all of it, her eyes tracking Alara's movements, but seeing something far away. Her silver hair fell in tangled waves around a face that might have been beautiful once, and still carried traces of elegance beneath the wear of time and hardship. Her clothes, Alara noticed now, were made of fine fabric despite their current state, silk beneath the dirt. quality stitching beneath the tears, and on her wrist, barely visible beneath her sleeve, old scars that looked like rope burns. Someone had hurt this woman. Someone had bound her, kept her, damaged her. Alara's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice soft as she pressed a warm cup into trembling hands. "Can you tell me your name?" The woman stared at the tea as if she had never seen such a thing before. Then she lifted it to her lips, took a small sip, and shook her head. "I can't remember. There's only fog in my mind, fog and fragments." "What kind of fragments?" "A boy." The woman's voice cracked on the word. "A boy with dark hair and eyes like winter storms. He was tall, so tall and strong, but there was so much sadness in him." Tears slipped down weathered cheeks. "I think I loved him. I think he was important, but I can't remember his name. I can't remember anything." Alara took the woman's hands, feeling bones too close beneath skin, feeling the tremor of a body that had survived something terrible. "It's all right. Memory or no memory, you're not alone tonight. You're safe here." The woman looked at her with something like wonder. "You have a kind soul. I can feel it like sunlight." They sat together through the night while the mating ceremony raged in the forest beyond. Ilara made soup from vegetables in her garden, found clean clothes that were too big but warm enough, prepared the small guest room she had kept empty for years as if waiting for exactly this moment. The woman ate sparingly, spoke in fragments, drifted between lucidity and confusion. But each time she surfaced, her eyes found Alara, or from alarm with growing trust, with the desperate gratitude of someone who had been lost in darkness and finally found a hand reaching out to guide her home. "What should I call you?" Alara asked as she helped the woman into bed, tucking blankets around fragile shoulders. "I don't know. I don't have a name anymore." Alara considered for a moment. Outside, the first light of dawn was beginning to paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. A new day, a new beginning. "Rosa," she decided. "You look like a Rosa to me. Strong and beautiful and meant to bloom even in harsh conditions." The woman smiled, and for just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition not of the name but of kindness, of being seen as a person rather than a problem. "Rosa," she repeated softly. "I like that. It feels almost familiar." She fell asleep whispering fragments about mountains in a great house made of stone, about a boy who grew into a man who carried the world on his shoulders. Alara sat beside her until her breathing deepened into peaceful rhythm, then finally allowed herself to rest. She had no way of knowing that this night, this simple act of kindness had set wheels in motion that would reshape her entire existence. That the woman sleeping in her guest room carried secrets that could shake kingdoms. That somewhere far away, a man with eyes like winter storms had never stopped searching for exactly what Alara had found. All she knew was that she had made a choice, and that choice would change everything. Days turned into weeks, and Rosa remained in Alara's cottage. Her memory did not return in floods, but in trickles, small fragments surfacing like debris after a storm. She remembered the taste of honey and tea and the smell of roses in summer. She remembered snow falling on mountain peaks and the sound of wolves singing under full moons. But the important things, the essential things, remained locked behind walls of fog that would not yield. Ilara did not push. She understood that some wounds needed time, that some minds protected themselves by forgetting, and that healing could not be rushed no matter how desperately one might wish otherwise. Instead, she incorporated Rosa into her daily life. They walked together through autumn fields, leaves crunching beneath their feet, as Rosa grew stronger with each passing day. Elara taught her the names of herbs and their uses, and Rosa listened with an attention that suggested this was not entirely new information. Her hands, when she helped prepare remedies, moved with a practiced grace that spoke of familiarity. "You knew this," Elara observed one afternoon, watching Rosa grind valerian root with expert precision. "Before. Wherever you came from, you knew medicine." Rosa paused, staring at her own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. "I think I did. There are moments when my body remembers what my mind cannot." She began teaching Alara things in return. Ancient remedies passed down through generations. Combinations of herbs that Alara had never encountered in any book. Knowledge that seemed to belong to palaces rather than village cottages. "Where did you learn this?" Alara asked one evening, watching Rosa prepare a tincture with movements too refined to be self-taught. Rosa's brow furrowed with the effort of remembering. There was a woman, old, wise. She served in a great house, I think. She taught me when I was young. Her hand stilled. I can almost see her face, but when I reach for it, it fades like morning mist. The village whispered about them. The Omega who had missed the mating ceremony to care for a stranger. The woman who had given up her chance at finding her destined mate for an old woman no one knew or claimed. Some called Alara foolish. Others called her cursed. A few, the kinder souls among them, simply called her good. Alara ignored them all. She had learned long ago that the opinions of others carried only the weight you gave them, and she gave them nothing. Rosa, however, noticed the whispers, the sidelong glances when they walked through the market, the conversations that stopped too quickly when they approached. "You should not have to endure this because of me," Rosa said one evening, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks, but heavy with guilt. "You sacrificed so much that night. Your chance at a mate, at happiness." Alara stirred honey into Rosa's tea, her movements slow and deliberate. "I found something better. Purpose, connection without obligation." She handed Rosa the cup, their fingers brushing. "You needed help, and I could give it. That's enough." Rosa reached out, touching Alara's cheek with papery fingers. Her eyes, pale blue and filled with depths of emotion her mind could not fully access, searched Alara's face. "My boy," she whispered. "I feel like he would never give up on someone he loved. Something tells me he carries heavy burdens, but he carries them without complaint." She paused, frustration flickering across her features. "I wish I could remember his name. I wish I could remember his face clearly." The words came more frequently now. The boy with winter eyes, the man who carried the world. Rosa spoke of him in her sleep, called out for him during nightmares that left her shaking and tearful. Ilara began to understand that whoever Rosa had been before this man had been the center of her world. And somewhere this man was missing her too. The nightmare came on the night when the moon hung full and heavy in the sky. Ilara woke to screaming. Not the cry of pain or fear, but the anguished howl of someone reliving horror. She threw back her blankets and ran to Rosa's room, finding the older woman tangled in sheets thrashing against invisible demons. "No," Rosa screamed, her voice cracking. "Why? Why would you do this to us?" Ilara grabbed Rosa's shoulders, shaking gently but firmly. "Rosa, Rosa, wake up. It's a dream. Just a dream." Rosa's eyes flew open, wild and unseeing for a moment before focusing on Alara's face. Her breathing came in ragged gasps. Sweat soaked her nightgown. But when Alara searched her eyes for recognition of what she had dreamed, she found only the familiar fog. "What happened?" Alara asked, keeping her voice calm even as her heart raced. "You were screaming. Can you remember anything?" Rosa pressed her hands to her temples, face twisted in concentration. "There was a man, a shadow. He was supposed to be safe, supposed to be trusted. But he—" She shook her head violently. "Every time I try to see his face, it disappears. There's just darkness and the smell of blood and running through trees until I couldn't run anymore." "Someone attacked you," Alara said softly. It was not a question. "Yes, I think someone wanted me dead." Rosa lowered her hands, her eyes meeting Alara's with sudden clarity. "And I think they might still be out there. Whoever I was before, whatever I was running from it, hasn't ended just because I can't remember it." The words settled into Alara's chest like ice. She had suspected as much. The quality of Rosa's clothes, the rope burns on her wrists, the knowledge that belonged to great houses rather than common folk. Rosa had been someone important, someone worth hurting, someone worth silencing. "You're safe here," Alara said, though she wondered if it was true. "No one will find you in Millbrook. No one will hurt you while I'm here." Rosa caught Alara's hand, holding tight. "You're too good to me, too good for someone you don't even know." "I know you," Alara said softly. "I know you take your tea with too much honey. I know you hum old songs while you work, and that you know more about healing herbs than any village healer should. I know you cry for a boy with winter eyes, and that you have more strength in you than you realize." She squeezed Rosa's hand. "I know enough." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "In another life, I think I had a daughter. I can almost remember her face. But when I look at you, when I feel your kindness, I think perhaps she would have been like you. Perhaps I would have wanted her to be exactly like you." The words settled into Alara's heart like seeds finding fertile soil. She had not thought about family in years, had closed that door, when she closed the door on bonds and destiny. But Rosa had opened something she thought locked forever. A longing for connection that went beyond the romantic, beyond the physical, into something deeper and more enduring. Perhaps some bonds were not chains at all. Perhaps some connections were simply the universe's way of saying you were not meant to walk alone. 2 months after the night of the ceremony, winter had begun to show its teeth. Snow dusted the mountain peaks and morning frost painted patterns on Alara's windows. Rosa had grown stronger, steadier, more herself, even if she still didn't know who that self truly was. She helped with chores, contributed to Alara's healing work, and filled the small cottage with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. They had become family, not by blood or bond, but by choice, by the accumulation of small moments, shared meals and quiet evenings, laughter over burned bread and tears over memories that surfaced only to slip away again. The fierce protectiveness Alara felt when anyone looked at Rosa with suspicion or scorn. Rosa was hers now, hers to protect, hers to care for, hers to love. She had no idea that everything was about to change. The strangers rode into Millbrook on a morning when clouds hung low and heavy with unshed snow. Alara was at the market purchasing herbs she could not grow herself when the thunder of hooves made everyone stop and stare. A single rider on a massive black horse, moving with the controlled grace of a predator. Behind him, more horses emerged from the mist. 5, 10, 20. Warriors in dark leather and silver insignia, their presence radiating power that made every wolf in the village instinctively lower their eyes. Every wolf except Alara. She stood frozen beside a vendor's stall, a bundle of dried rosemary clutched in her hands, watching the lead rider with something between curiosity and dread. He was enormous, built like the warriors of ancient legend. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, and a beard framed a face carved from stone and shadow. But it was his eyes that caught her, held her, refused to let go. Gray eyes, the color of storm clouds before lightning strikes, the color of steel in winter light. Eyes like winter storms. The realization hit Alara with physical force. This was him. This was the boy Rosa cried out for in her nightmares. The man she described in fragments of memory that never quite formed a complete picture. Somehow, impossibly, he had found his way here. The rider dismounted in a single fluid movement, his boots striking cobblestones with authority. His gaze swept the gathered crowd, and where it passed, wolves looked away, submitted, trembled. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, the unmistakable aura of an alpha so dominant that even the air seemed to bow before him. "I'm looking for an Omega," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent square. "One who houses an older woman with silver hair. Tell me where to find her." No one spoke. No one moved. The weight of his presence pressed down on the village like a physical force demanding obedience through sheer existence. A shopkeeper pointed toward the edge of the village with a trembling hand. "The cottage beyond the old mill. Alara Vance lives there." The rider's gaze followed the direction, and something flickered across his stone face. Hope. Desperate, terrified hope that he was trying to control but couldn't quite contain. Then his gaze swung to Alara, who still stood beside the herb stall, and something else entered his expression. Recognition, not of her face but of her defiance. She had not lowered her eyes, had not submitted, had not trembled like the others. She stood before him as an equal, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. "You," he said, and his voice had changed, softer, more human. "You are Alara Vance." "I am." "The woman in your cottage. Describe her." Alara's chin lifted. "Tell me why I should." The warriors behind him shifted hands, moving toward weapons. An Omega had just challenged their alpha. Such things were not done. Such things were not tolerated. But the rider raised a hand and his men stilled instantly. "Because she may be my mother," he said, and his voice cracked on the word. "Because she vanished 3 years ago and I have never stopped searching. Because if there is even a chance that she is alive and safe in your home, I need to see her. I need to know." Alara studied him for a long moment, saw beneath the power in the armor and the terrible weight of authority, saw a son who loved his mother, saw a man haunted by loss and driven by hope he was afraid to feel. "She doesn't remember," Alara said finally. "Whoever she was before, she doesn't know. She has moments of clarity fragments that surface and fade, but no complete picture. If you expect to find the woman you lost, you may be disappointed. I don't care. His voice had gone rough with emotion he was barely containing. I don't care if she never remembers. I just need her to be alive. Alara made her decision. Follow me. The walk to her cottage had never felt longer. Alara was acutely aware of the man beside her, his massive presence taking up space in ways that went beyond the physical. His warriors had stayed behind at his command, but even alone he carried an army's worth of intensity. What's your name? She asked, breaking the silence. Kalen Ironvale. The name meant nothing to Alara, but the way he said it suggested it should. Suggested that most people would recognize it immediately and respond with appropriate awe or fear. And you think Rosa is your mother? Rosa? His stride faltered slightly. Her name is Rosalind. Rosalind Ironvale. Rosalind, such a beautiful name. A name that belonged to someone who had been important, powerful, loved. Alara had chosen Rosa because it felt right, never knowing how close to truth she had come. She doesn't answer to that name, Alara said quietly. When I found her, she couldn't remember anything. I had to call her something. You named her Rosa. She looks like a rose to me, strong and beautiful and meant to bloom even in harsh conditions. Kalen made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob too brief to identify. That's exactly what she was, before everything fell apart. They reached the cottage. Smoke curled from the chimney, and through the window, Alara could see Rosa moving inside, probably preparing lunch from the vegetables they had picked yesterday. Safe, content, unaware that her entire world was about to shift. Wait here, Alara said at the door. Let me prepare her. If you burst in there, the shock might set her back. Kalen looked like he wanted to argue, like every fiber of his being was screaming to push past her and run to his mother. But he nodded once sharp and controlled and remained on the threshold. Alara entered the cottage to find Rosa arranging dried herbs in jars, humming softly under her breath. She looked up at Alara's entrance, and her smile was warm and genuine and completely trusting. You're back early. Did you find the rosemary? Rosa. Alara crossed to her, taking her hands. There's someone here to see you, a man. He believes he knows who you are. Fear flickered across Rosa's face. Someone from before, from wherever I came from. Yes, he says he's your son. Rosa's breath caught. Her grip on Alara's hands tightened until the bones ground together. My boy, the one with winter eyes. Is it him? Is it really him? I don't know, but he's waiting outside and he's desperate to see you. He says he's been searching for 3 years. Tears began to fall down Rosa's weathered cheeks. 3 years. He searched for 3 years. He never gave up. Rosa released Alara's hands and pressed them to her heart instead. Her breathing had gone rapid, her pulse visible in her throat. I'm afraid. What if I don't remember him? What if I look at my own son and feel nothing? Alara cupped Rosa's face in her hands, forcing their eyes to meet. Then you'll learn each other again. Memory or no memory, love can be rebuilt. Trust can grow from new soil. You taught me that. These past 2 months, you showed me that connection doesn't require perfect understanding. Just willingness. Just choice, Varamam. Rosa nodded, drawing strength from Alara's certainty. All right, bring him in. Bring my boy in. Alara walked to the door and opened it to find Kalen exactly where she had left him. He looked like a man facing execution, like someone who had armored himself against hope for so long that the possibility of its fulfillment was almost worse than its absence. She's ready, Alara said. Be gentle with her, she's fragile. Kalen stepped inside, and the cottage suddenly seemed far too small for his presence. His gaze swept the room, taking in the modest furnishings, the drying herbs, the simple evidence of a life built on healing rather than power. Then he saw Rosa. She had risen from her chair, one hand gripping the back for support. Silver hair fell around her face, catching light from the fire. Pale blue eyes met gray, and the distance between them collapsed into nothing. Kalen's knees buckled. The Alphaking, the Shadow Wolf, the man whose name made warriors tremble and kingdoms yield, dropped to the floor before an old woman in a borrowed dress. His massive frame curled forward, his shoulders shaking hands, reaching out but stopping just short of touching her, as if he feared she might dissolve like a dream upon contact. Mama. The word came out broken, shattered more prayer than speech. Mama, I found you. Rosa moved forward, each step slow and uncertain, until she stood directly before her kneeling son. Her hand lifted, trembling violently, and touched his face, traced the line of his jaw, felt the wet trails of tears on his cheeks. Something shifted in her expression. Not memory exactly, but recognition on a level deeper than consciousness. Her fingers moved through his dark hair, and her breath caught on a sound that was half laugh, half sob. My boy, she whispered, my strong boy. You're so big now. When did you get so big? Kalen gathered her in his arms, gentle despite his size, and wept against her shoulder. Great racking sobs that seemed to tear themselves from somewhere deep in his chest. Years of searching, of grief held behind iron walls, poured out in shaking waves. I never stopped, he managed between sobs. Every day, every single day I searched. I never gave up on you. I know. Rosa stroked his hair with hands that grew steadier with each pass. I know you didn't. Even when I couldn't remember your name, I felt you searching. I felt you refusing to let go. She pressed a kiss to the top of his head. I'm so sorry I couldn't remember. I'm so sorry I couldn't find my way back to you. You're here now, that's all that matters. You're alive and you're here. Alara watched from the doorway, her own eyes wet with tears she didn't bother to hide. She had expected arrogance when she learned who Kalen was. Expected the cold cruelty she had always associated with powerful alphas. Instead, she saw a son who loved his mother so completely that 3 years of hopeless searching couldn't diminish it by a single degree. The Alpha King, she realized, was just a man. A man who had lost something precious and never stopped fighting to get it back. That was something she could understand. That was something she could respect. Hours passed before anyone spoke of practical matters. Kalen would not release his mother, kept one hand on her at all times, as if afraid she might vanish again the moment he looked away. Rosa, for her part, seemed content to simply be near him, touching his face, his hands, his hair, relearning the shape of a son she felt but could not fully remember. Finally, as afternoon light began to fade, Kalen turned to Alara with eyes that had dried but still carried traces of red. You saved her, he said, and his voice had regained some of its authority, but none of its coldness. When she was lost and alone and had nothing, you took her in. You cared for her for 2 months while I searched everywhere else. She needed help. Anyone would have done the same. No. Kalen stood his full height, impressive even in the modest cottage. They wouldn't have. The mating ceremony was happening that night. Your chance at finding your destined mate, but you chose her instead. Alara met his gaze evenly. Choice outweighs fate in my experience. Something flickered in those winter gray eyes, something that looked almost like recognition of a kindred spirit. You saved her life. I owe you a debt I can never repay. You owe me nothing. I didn't do it for payment. Nevertheless, Kalen glanced at his mother, who was watching their exchange with knowing eyes. I'm taking her home, back to Shadow Peak, to our palace, where she can receive proper care and be surrounded by those who love her. Alara had known this moment would come, had prepared herself for it through all the weeks of growing close to Rosa, but the reality of it still hit her like a physical blow. The cottage would be empty again. The family she had built would dissolve. She would return to solitude and purpose in the safety of being alone. Of course, she said, keeping her voice steady. I'll help her pack what little she has. Come with us. Alara blinked. What? Come with us. It was Rosa who spoke now, her voice stronger than it had been all day. She reached out and gripped Alara's wrist with surprising strength. I won't go without her. She saved me when I was lost. She's family now. Kalen studied Alara with an intensity that made her want to look away, but couldn't quite manage. My mother's right. You've cared for her when no one else would. The least I can offer is a place in the palace, a position, whatever you need. Your healing skills would be valuable to many. I have a life here, Alara said, even as her heart began to race. A home. I can't just leave everything behind. Please, Rosa's grip tightened. I need you. I know I have no right to ask that you've already given me so much. But these 2 months with you are the only memories I have that aren't pain and fog. You are my anchor, Alara, my proof that kindness exists. Please don't make me lose that. Alara looked at the woman who had become her family, looked at the son who had searched for 3 years and wept with joy when he found what he'd lost, looked at the life she had built in Millbrook, the solitude she had chosen, the safety she had wrapped around herself like armor. And she thought about her mother, about bonds that destroyed instead of nurturing, about the fear that had kept her hiding from destiny for 10 long years. But Rosa was not a bond. Rosa was a choice, a human being who needed her, a connection built on kindness rather than fate. Could she really walk away from that? Could she really return to her empty cottage and pretend that nothing had changed? All right, Alara heard herself say. I'll come, but only until she's settled, only until she doesn't need me anymore. Rosa's face broke into a smile so bright it seemed to illuminate the entire room. Even Kalen's stern expression softened, though something complex moved behind his eyes as he looked at Alara. We leave tomorrow at first light, he said. Pack what matters. What matters, Alara thought as she looked around the cottage that had been her refuge for so many years. Her grandmother's chair, her mother's recipe book, the herbs she had spent years collecting and learning to use. What mattered was already standing in this room. An old woman with silver hair and a heart full of love, a chance at family she had never expected to find. And perhaps, though she would not admit it even to herself, a man with winter eyes who had knelt before his mother and wept without shame. Ilara began to pack. She had no way of knowing that the danger was not behind them, but ahead. That the people who had tried to kill Rosa once were still hidden in the shadows of Shadow Peak Palace, waiting and watching and planning. She had no way of knowing that in choosing to follow her heart, she had stepped onto a path that would lead through darkness and betrayal and blood. All she knew was that for the first time in 10 years, she had made a choice that terrified her. And somehow that terror felt exactly like hope. The journey to Shadow Peak took 3 days. 3 days of riding through mountain passes where snow clung to ancient pines like white velvet. 3 days of sleeping in way stations prepared in advance, eating food finer than anything Alara had tasted in her entire life. 3 days of watching Kalen Ironvale transform between two entirely different men. With his warriors, he was exactly what legends claimed. Cold and commanding, his voice capable of stripping bark from trees. His presence made hardened soldiers stumble over their own feet, made them check their weapons and straighten their posture with nervous energy. They called him the Shadow Wolf, and Alara understood why. He moved through the world like darkness given form, like something that belonged to the night and merely tolerated the day. But with his mother, he transformed. Alara watched him adjust Rosa's blankets with hands that could crush stone, but moved with infinite gentleness. She heard him ask about her comfort in a voice softened to something almost tender. She saw him spend hours beside Rosa as she drifted in and out of sleep, simply holding her hand, simply being near. And sometimes when he thought no one was watching, his eyes would find Alara. She felt his gaze like heat on her skin, like the brush of fingertips along her spine. There was hunger in those depths, but also confusion. Intensity barely restrained, as if he was fighting some internal battle she could not see. Alara told herself it meant nothing. Told herself that powerful alphas looked at everyone that way. Told herself that the flutter in her chest was simply altitude and exhaustion and nothing more. She was not entirely convincing, even to herself. On the third evening, they made camp beneath stars that hung low enough to touch. Rosa had fallen asleep early, worn out from travel, despite the comfortable carriage Kalen had provided. The warriors had settled into their usual efficient routine, setting watches and checking perimeters. Alara sat by the fire wrapped in a coat of soft fur that had appeared mysteriously in her pack on the second day. She suspected Kalen, though he denied any knowledge when she asked. Footsteps approached, heavy but somehow quiet. Kalen settled across from her, the flames casting dancing shadows across his face. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. The tiredness of a man who had carried too much for too long. She's getting stronger, Alara offered, breaking the silence. The travel has been good for her. Having you near has been good for her. Because of you. Kalen accepted the tea she had been about to drink, and their fingers brushing in the exchange. The contact sent electricity through Alara's arm, made her breath catch in ways she refused to acknowledge. She trusts you completely. I've never seen her attached to someone so quickly. Perhaps she remembers kindness from before, on some level deeper than conscious memory. Kalen was quiet for a long moment, studying her over the flames. The firelight turned his gray eyes to molten silver, and Alara found herself unable to look away. Why did you really stay with her? He asked. That night when everyone else ran toward the ceremony, you could have passed her by like all the others. You could have sought your mate. Alara looked into the fire, watching flames consume wood and transform it to ash. Because I've seen what mating bonds can do, how they can trap and diminish and break. She paused, gathering courage she did not know she possessed. I watched my mother wither under a bond that should have been beautiful. Watched her lose herself piece by piece to an alpha who saw her as property. She died when I was 16, just stopped wanting to live. Understanding flickered in Kaylin's eyes. Not pity, which Alara would have hated, but recognition. Not all bonds are chains. Perhaps not, but I decided long ago that I would rather be alone than gamble my soul to find out. And if your mate found you anyway, if the bond demanded recognition, Alara met his gaze steadily, then I would hope he was the kind of man who valued choice over destiny, who saw me as a partner rather than a possession. Kaylin stared at her, something shifting in his expression, something that looked almost like wonder. You are extraordinary. Most Omegas I have known would do anything for a bond, especially with an alpha of status. But you would choose freedom instead. Would you not do the same if the roles were reversed? He laughed, the sound rough and genuine, surprising them both. Yes, I suppose I would. They talked deep into the night, finding unexpected common ground. Kaylin spoke of the loneliness of leadership, of decisions that cost lives but save kingdoms. Alara shared her love of healing, her belief that service without servitude was the truest form of strength. The fire burned low, and neither moved to leave. When they finally retired to their separate tents, Alara's heart was racing in ways it had not raced in years. And somewhere deep inside her, the part she had locked away at 16 began to wonder if perhaps not all bonds were prisons. Perhaps some were wings. Shadow Peak Palace rose from the mountains like a crown of stone and ambition. Alara stood in the courtyard, overwhelmed by towers that pierced the clouds, by walls that had withstood centuries of siege and storm. The palace was built into the mountain itself, gray granite, flowing seamlessly into natural rock, as if the structure had grown rather than been constructed. This was Kaylin's domain. This was where his power was absolute. Magnificent, is it not? Rosa said beside her, leaning on Alara's arm for support. Her memory had been returning in larger fragments during the journey, though significant gaps remained. My husband built the foundations, but Kaylin expanded it after he took the throne, gave the people something to believe in. He was young when his father died. 20 years old, barely a man suddenly responsible for thousands of lives. Rosa's voice carried old grief and older pride. The kingdom was fracturing, packs turning against each other, rogues growing bolder by the day. But Kaylin held it together, united them through strength and strategy and sheer force of will. She looked at Alara with knowing eyes. He has given everything to these people, including his own happiness. Before Alara could respond, Kaylin appeared in the courtyard, striding toward them with a man at his side. The man was tall and broad, with brown hair cropped short and eyes that missed nothing. He moved like a warrior, but his expression as he looked at Kaylin held something warmer than mere service. Alara Vance, Kaylin said formally, his voice carrying across the courtyard. I present you to the court as honored guest and companion to the Queen Mother. You will have rooms in the royal wing, access to all palace resources. Your word carries weight here. That is not necessary. It is done. His tone allowed no argument. You saved my mother. This kingdom owes you everything. The man beside him stepped forward, bowing slightly. I am Brennan Holt, His Majesty's Beta. If you need anything during your stay, you have only to ask. Brennan's voice was warm, his manner genuine. Alara found herself relaxing slightly. Thank you. I am sure I will have many questions. And I am sure you will have many answers, Brennan replied with a slight smile. The palace has been waiting a long time for the Queen Mother's return. Everyone will want to meet the woman who brought her home. Everyone, Alara would soon discover, included people who were not pleased by Rosa's survival at all. The first weeks in Shadow Peak passed in a blur of new experiences. Alara tended to Rosa, who grew stronger and more lucid with each passing day. Memories returned in pieces, fitting together like fragments of a shattered mirror slowly being reassembled. Rosa remembered her husband, now remembered his death, remembered the years of watching Kaylin grow from a grieving boy into a powerful king. but the night of her attack remained shrouded in fog. There was a gathering, Rosa said one evening, her brow furrowed with concentration. A celebration of some kind. I stepped outside for air, and then she shook her head. Shadows, pain, running through forest with blood on my hands. Then nothing until I woke in your village, not knowing who I was. Alara took her hand, squeezing gently. It will come. When you are ready, it will come. I am afraid of what I might remember. Rosa's voice dropped to a whisper. There was someone there that night. Someone I knew. Someone who should not have been where they were. Her pale blue eyes met Alara's. I think they wanted me dead, Alara. And I think they might still be here. The words settled into Alara's chest like ice. She began watching the court with new eyes after that. Observe the counselors who surrounded Kalen, the nobles who vied for his attention, the servants who moved through halls with downcast eyes. Everyone smiled, everyone bowed, everyone spoke words of joy at the Queen Mother's return. But Alara had learned long ago that smiles could hide knives. One man in particular drew her attention. Lord Aldrich Mercer, head counselor, a man of 58 years with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that reminded her of frozen lakes. He had served Kalen's father before serving Kalen himself, held more influence than any other advisor. He was also always watching. Alara felt his gaze during formal dinners, during walks through the palace gardens, during the moments when she thought herself unobserved. Always watching with those cold, calculating eyes. Always smiling that smile that never quite reached beyond his lips. 3 weeks after arriving at Shadow Peak, Alara decided to watch back. She began noting Lord Aldrich's movements. Observed that he often disappeared after evening meals, returning hours later with no explanation. Noticed that certain servants seemed to report to him before they reported to anyone else. Saw him receive letters by Hawk that he read in private, burning them immediately after. One night, unable to sleep, she walked the corridors and saw something that made her blood run cold. Lord Aldrich Mercer standing in a shadowed alcove speaking with 2 men she had never seen before. Their clothes were rough, their manner furtive, their presence in the palace inexplicable. When Aldrich handed them a small pouch that clinked with coins, Alara pressed herself into the darkness and held her breath until they passed. She said nothing to Kalen, not yet. What could she say that a respected counselor met with strangers in the night, that her instincts whispered warnings she could not prove? She was an Omega from a small village, a healer who knew nothing of politics or power. But she watched Lord Aldrich Mercer more carefully than ever, and she waited for proof. The library became her sanctuary. 3 floors of books and scrolls, windows that looked out over mountain valleys, comfortable chairs positioned to catch the afternoon light. Alara spent hours there researching methods of memory restoration, ancient texts that spoke of trauma and healing and the resilience of the mind. She was not surprised when Kalen began appearing there too. At first, he came with questions about herbs and remedies for his soldiers. Then he came with topics that had nothing to do with medicine at all. Philosophy and governance, history and strategy, dreams for the future, and wounds from the past. They talked for hours, losing track of time as easily as breathing. The council wishes me to choose a mate, Kalen said one afternoon, standing by the window, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the fading light. They present candidates at every opportunity, daughters of powerful families, political alliances, wrapped in silk and perfume. Alara looked up from her book, something sharp twisting in her chest. And what do you wish? I wish they would see that a king who chooses duty over heart becomes a tyrant eventually. That a bond forced by politics rather than truth destroys both people in it. He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. I wish for what you described by the fire that night. Partnership. Choice. Someone who sees the man beneath the crown and wants him anyway. You are the Alpha King. You could have anyone. I do not want anyone. His voice had dropped to something low and rough. I want someone who challenges me, who speaks truth when others speak flattery, who looks at me without fear and treats me as an equal. The air between them thickened. Alara felt the pull of something she had spent her whole life running from. Felt it tugging at her chest, her soul, the places she had locked away and sworn never to open. Kalen, she whispered, and his name on her lips felt like a door swinging wide. He moved closer, each step slow and deliberate, giving her every chance to retreat. I know you are afraid. I know what you saw with your parents, what you believe about bonds. I would never force you, never claim you against your will. He stopped inches away close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. But I cannot pretend anymore that I do not feel this. Cannot pretend that every moment near you does not make my wolf howl with recognition. Alara's heart pounded against her ribs. Recognition of what? You know what? His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek without quite touching. You feel it too. I see it in your eyes. Hear it in your heartbeat. We are meant for each other, Alara. Not because destiny demands it, but because something far deeper does. She should run, should retreat to the safety of her rooms and her fears, and the walls she had built so carefully over so many years. Every lesson her mother's death had taught her screamed to flee, but she did not run. I need time, she said instead, the words barely audible. I need to understand what this is before I surrender to it. Kaylin's hand finally touched her cheek, the contact sending sparks through her entire being. Take all the time you need. I have waited 35 years to feel this. I can wait longer still. He left her standing in the library with her heart racing and her certainties crumbling, and Alara knew with terrible clarity that time would not save her. She was already falling. The nightmare that changed everything came during the third week at Shadow Peak. Rosa's scream tore through the night, piercing walls and waking half the royal wing. Ilara reached her room within moments, finding the older woman thrashing in her bed, eyes open but seeing something far away and terrible. He knew, Rosa screamed. He told them when to come. He smiled at me, and then he let them in. Ilara grabbed Rosa's shoulders, trying to anchor her to the present. Rosa, Rosa, wake up. You are safe. Rosa's eyes focused suddenly, snapping to Alara's face with desperate clarity. I remember. Oh God, I remember everything. Kaylin burst through the door moments later, half-dressed, sword in hand, warriors flooding the hallway behind him. He took in the scene with a single sweep of his eyes, and then he was beside his mother, gathering her in his arms. What happened? Are you hurt? No, not hurt. Rosa pulled back, her face wet with tears, but her expression fierce. I remember, Kaylin. I remember the night I was taken. The room went silent. Even the warriors in the hallway seemed to hold their breath. Tell me, Kaylin said, his voice dangerously soft. Rosa looked at Alara, then at her son, then at the guards who could not be trusted. Went everyone away. This is for your ears only. When the door closed behind the last warrior, Rosa began to speak. It was the autumn feast. 3 years ago, I went outside for air, and I saw Lord Aldrich Mercer in the garden. He was speaking with strangers, men in dark clothes, men with rogue marks on their arms. Her voice shook but did not break. I hid and listened. They were planning the attack. Aldrich was telling them where the guards would be weakest, when to strike, how to find me. Kaylin's face had turned to stone. You are certain, as certain as I am, that you are my son. Rosa gripped his hands. He saw me, Kaylin. At the end, as I tried to run, he saw me. He smiled and said that it was a shame that I had been kind to him once, but some things were more important than kindness. Why? Kaylin's voice cracked on the word. Why would he do this? Rosa closed her eyes. Because he loved me once, long before I met your father. I rejected him, chose another, and he never forgave me for it. She opened her eyes, and they were hard as diamonds. He killed your father too, poisoned slow and subtle over many months. I did not remember until now, but I saw him putting something in your father's wine. I thought nothing of it at the time. I should have known. I should have seen. The silence that followed was absolute. Ilara watched Kaylin's face transform, watched grief and rage and something darker battle behind his eyes. For a moment she feared he would become the monster that legends claimed, that he would storm from this room and tear Aldrich Mercer apart with his bare hands. But then his eyes found hers, and somehow impossibly that connection calmed him. We cannot act hastily, Kaylin said, his voice controlled with visible effort. If we arrest Aldrich now, his allies will scatter. We need them all. The winter solstice celebration, Rosa said. It is 3 weeks away. Everyone will be gathered. His co-conspirators will feel safe. And we spring the trap. Kaylin nodded slowly. Let him think his plans are proceeding. Let him believe we suspect nothing. There is more. Rosa's grip on her son's hands tightened. The rogues who attacked me, They were not random. They were organized, trained, disciplined. Aldrich has built an army in secret. They will attack during the solstice. The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. A traitor in the palace, an army waiting in the shadows, a celebration that would gather every important wolf in the kingdom in one place. And Alara, who had come here seeking only to help an old woman, found herself standing at the center of a conspiracy that could destroy everything. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Kalen looked at her, and in his gaze she saw something beyond the Alpha King, beyond the Shadow Wolf. She saw a man who was terrified not for himself, but for those he loved. A man who had just learned that betrayal came from the heart of his own court. "We plan," he said. "We prepare, and we give Lord Aldrich Mercer exactly what he expects." A cold smile crossed his face. "Until we don't." The 3 weeks that followed were the longest of Alara's life. She continued her routines as if nothing had changed, caring for Rosa, researching in the library, taking walks through gardens that suddenly felt watched by 1,000 unseen eyes. Every smile from Lord Aldrich Mercer made her skin crawl. Every polite greeting felt like poison. But she played her part. They all did. Rosa pretended her memory remained fragmented, speaking in confused circles when Aldrich inquired about her recovery. Kalen maintained his cold demeanor, with the counselor discussed politics and strategy as if nothing had changed. Brennan quietly identified Aldrich's allies among the guard and staff, building a list of names that would face justice when the time came. And Alara watched, listened, gathered pieces of a puzzle that grew more disturbing with each passing day. She discovered that Aldrich sent letters by hawk to unknown recipients in the mountains, that 3 of the 12 council members met with him in private sessions that appeared on no official schedule, that the servants who reported to him came from families with old grudges against the Iron Veil line. She told Kalen everything. They met in secret in rooms that could not be overheard, and she shared each observation with precision that surprised them both. The Omega from a small village had become an intelligence gatherer without ever intending to. "You should not be involved in this," Kalen said one night, pacing before the fire in his private study. "It is dangerous. If Aldrich suspects you know anything, I am already involved." Alara rose from her chair, moving to stand before him, stopping his restless movement with her presence. "I was involved from the moment I brought your mother to this palace. Walking away now would not make me safer. It would only make me useless." Kalen stared at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her heart stumble. "I cannot lose you. You will not. You do not understand." He took her hands, his grip almost desperate. "You are not just a woman who helped my mother anymore. You are not just a guest in my palace. You are—" He broke off, jaw clenching with the effort of restraint. "I am what— mine." The word came out rough, torn from somewhere deep. "My mate, my other half. The one my wolf has been calling for since the moment you opened your cottage door and looked at me without fear." He raised her hands to his lips, pressing kisses to her knuckles. "I know you asked for time. I know you have reasons to fear what I am offering. But I cannot keep silent anymore. I love you, Alara, not because of destiny or bond or any force beyond our control. I love you because of who you are, your kindness, your courage, your stubborn refusal to be anything other than exactly yourself." Alara felt tears burning behind her eyes, felt walls she had spent a decade building begin to crumble like sand before the tide. "My mother died from a bond," she whispered. "She withered and broke and finally just stopped living. I swore I would never let that happen to me. It will not." Kalen cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I am not your father, Alara. I do not want to possess you. I want to partner with you. I want to wake up every morning and choose you again. I want to build something together that neither of us could build alone. And if I break, if the bond destroys me the way it destroyed her, then I will break with you. Then we will face whatever comes together." His thumb brushed away a tear she had not known she shed. "But I do not believe we will. I believe we are strong enough to build something different, something better. If you are willing to try." Alara looked into those eyes that held storms and shelter both, and saw her future written there. Not chains, not prisons, not the slow suffocation her mother had endured. She saw wings. Yes, she breathed, and the word felt like flying. Kaylin kissed her. The world exploded into light and color and sensation beyond anything Alara had imagined. The bond snapped into place like a key turning in a lock, golden threads weaving between their souls. But instead of weight, she felt freedom. Instead of chains, she felt lifted. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kaylin pressed his forehead to hers. Whatever comes at the solstice, we face it together. Together, Alara agreed. She did not know then how much that promise would cost her. Did not know that in 3 short weeks, she would be tested in ways she could never have imagined. All she knew was that she had finally stopped running, and that no matter what came next, she would not run again. The night before the solstice celebration, the palace hummed with final preparations. Servants rushed through corridors carrying decorations and supplies. The great hall had been transformed into a winter wonderland of ice sculptures and candles. Wolves from every territory had arrived, filling the palace with chatter and anticipation. Lord Aldrich Mercer smiled through it all, the picture of devoted service. Alara watched him from across the hall during the pre-celebration dinner, fighting the urge to tear that smile from his face. He had no idea that his scheme was known. No idea that his rogue army had been tracked and would face a coordinated counterattack the moment they breached the walls. "You are staring," Kaylin murmured beside her, his hand finding hers beneath the table. "I am imagining his face when he realizes." Patience. His fingers intertwined with hers. "Tomorrow justice comes for him. Tonight we let him believe he has won." Rosa sat on Kaylin's other side, playing her part perfectly. She spoke in confused sentences, asked questions she already knew the answers, to let Aldrich see exactly what he expected to see. A damaged woman whose memory remained conveniently fractured. But when her eyes met Alara's across the table, they burned with fierce clarity. "Tomorrow," those eyes said. "Tomorrow we end this." After dinner, Alara walked with Kaylin through the moonlit garden. Snow had fallen that afternoon, blanketing the world in white silence. Their breath fogged in the cold air as they moved between hedges, trimmed into fantastic shapes. "Tell me we will survive this," Alara said, her voice small in the vast quiet. Kaylin stopped walking, turning to face her. "I cannot promise that. War is uncertain, and betrayal makes it more so." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "But I can promise that whatever happens, I will be fighting beside you. That if we fall together. That no power in this world or any other will make me abandon you." That is not a comforting promise. No, but it is an honest one. He tilted her chin up, meeting her eyes. "I have lived 35 years as the Alphaking. I have made countless decisions that cost lives and saved kingdoms. But the only decision that ever mattered was the one to love you." Alara rose on her toes and kissed him, tasting snow and smoke and the particular flavor of a man who had become her entire world. "Then let us make certain we live to make many more decisions together." "Agreed," Asaya. They stood in the moonlight, wrapped in each other, drawing strength for the battle to come. Tomorrow would bring blood and fire and the unmasking of traitors. Tomorrow would test everything they had built. But tonight there was only this. Two souls who had found each other against all odds, choosing love over fear, partnership over solitude. Tomorrow could wait. Tonight they had each other. The winter solstice dawned cold and brilliant. Alara rose before the sun, watching darkness slowly yield to pale gold light over the mountain peaks. She had not slept well. Dreams of blood and fire had chased her through restless hours, leaving her tangled in sweat-soaked sheets and a sense of dread she could not shake. Today would decide everything. She dressed with careful precision, choosing the silver and blue gown that had appeared in her wardrobe 3 days ago. Another mysterious gift from Kaylin, though he continued to deny any knowledge when she asked. The fabric caught light like captured starlight, transforming her into something ethereal, something that belonged in this palace of power and secrets. Rosa was already awake when Alara entered her chamber, sitting before her mirror, while a maid arranged her silver hair into an elaborate style. The older woman met Alara's eyes in the reflection, and the fear they shared passed between them without words. "Leave us," Rosa told the maid, her voice steady despite everything. When they were alone, she turned to face Alara fully. "You are nervous." "Terrified," Alara admitted. "Not of the danger, of what could be lost. You, Kaylin, this life we have built, it feels too precious, too fragile." Rosa rose from her chair, crossing to take Alara's hands in her own. Her grip was stronger than it had been 3 months ago, steadied by recovered memory and renewed purpose. "Let me tell you something about my son," Rosa said. "When he was a boy, perhaps 7 years old, he found a wounded hawk in the garden. Its wing was broken, death certain. Any other child would have walked away. But Kalen refused to accept that. He spent weeks caring for that bird, feeding it, protecting it, willing it to live." She smiled at the memory. "And it did. It healed and flew again." "What does that have to do with today?" "Everything." Rosa squeezed Alara's hands. "Kalen has always fought for what he loves, even when the odds seem impossible. He will fight for this kingdom. He will fight for me. But most of all, he will fight for you." Her pale blue eyes softened. "And you will fight for him. I have seen it in you, Alara. The same fierce determination that makes my son who he is. Together, you are unstoppable." Alara felt tears prick her eyes. "How did you become so wise?" "Years of watching, loving, learning that the right words at the right moment can change everything." Rosa touched Alara's cheek with maternal tenderness. "Like the words you spoke to me that first night. You are safe now," 3 simple words that gave me hope when I had none. They embraced, holding tight, drawing strength from each other. When they pulled apart, both were ready to face whatever came. The great hall had been transformed into a winter palace of ice and light. Thousands of candles flickered from crystal chandeliers, casting dancing shadows across walls hung with silver tapestries. Ice sculptures depicted wolves in various poses of power and grace, their frozen forms seeming almost alive in the shifting light. Wolves from every territory filled the space, dressed in their finest, their voices rising in a symphony of celebration and anticipation. Alara entered on Kalen's arm, and the crowd parted before them like water before a ship's prow. She had never felt so exposed. Every eye in the hall tracked their progress, whispers following in their wake like trailing smoke. The Omega who had saved the Queen Mother. The woman who had captured the Alpha King's heart. Some gazes held curiosity. Others held envy. A few held something darker, quickly hidden beneath practiced smiles. Kalen's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, his touch grounding her. "Steady," he murmured low enough that only she could hear. "You belong here. Never doubt that." They took their places at the high table, Rosa seated on Kalen's other side. Lord Aldrich Mercer sat further down, his silver-streaked hair gleaming in the candlelight, his smile as warm and false as ever. He raised his goblet in toast when Kalen looked his way, and the Alpha King returned the gesture with perfectly controlled neutrality. The celebration began. Food arrived in endless courses, each more elaborate than the last. Wine flowed like water, loosening tongues and heightening spirits. Musicians played traditional songs that set feet tapping and hearts soaring. On the surface, everything was perfect. A kingdom united in celebration of the longest night and the light to come. But beneath the surface, warriors waited in hidden positions. Scouts monitored every entrance and passage. Brennan moved through the crowd with studied casualness, making final preparations that no observer would notice. The trap was set. Now they only had to wait for the prey. Midnight approached with agonizing slowness. Alara felt every minute stretch into eternity. Her nerves wound tighter with each passing moment. She danced when expected, smiled when required, made conversation that she would not remember afterward. All while watching, waiting, preparing for the storm about to break. Kalen remained at her side through most of it, his presence both comfort and reminder of what she stood to lose. His hand found hers beneath the table during quiet moments. His eyes met hers across crowded dance floors, speaking volumes without words. "I love you," those depths said. "Whatever happens, remember that." "I know," she answered silently. "I love you too." Rosa played her part with the skill of a master performer. She spoke in confused circles when Aldrich approached, let him see the damaged woman he expected. But when the counselor's attention wandered elsewhere, her expression sharpened with fierce intelligence. The clock struck 12, and the world exploded into chaos. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. Rogues burst through passages they believed unguarded, their faces twisted with battle rage, their weapons gleaming in candlelight. Women screamed. Men shouted. The peaceful celebration transformed into a battlefield in the space of heartbeats. But Kalen's warriors were ready. They emerged from hidden positions, meeting the rogue assault with coordinated precision. Steel clashed against steel. Bodies fell. Blood splattered across the ice sculptures, turning Winter Wonderland into crimson nightmare. Kalen moved like lightning given form. His sword sang through the air, cutting down rogues with brutal efficiency. The Shadow Wolf had emerged, and he was everything legends claimed and more. Terrifying, unstoppable, beautiful in his destruction. Elara pulled Rosa toward the wall, away from the worst of the fighting. Warriors had formed a protective circle around the high table, keeping the royal family safe while battle raged. But Alara's eyes never stopped moving, searching the chaos for the one face that mattered most. She found Aldrich Mercer slipping toward a side door. He thought he was escaping, thought that while attention focused on the obvious attack, he could vanish into shadows and emerge when the dust settled to claim whatever remained. His allies among the council were already moving toward the same exit rats fleeing a sinking ship. They did not see the warriors waiting for them. Brennan's voice cut through the chaos, commanding and clear. "Seal the exits. No one leaves." Aldrich spun his mask of composure, finally cracking. He looked toward the high table, toward the Queen Mother he had tried so hard to destroy, and saw Rosa watching him with eyes that burned with righteous fury. Recognition dawned on his face. She remembered. She knew everything. And then Aldrich did something no one expected. He grabbed a sword from a fallen rogue and charged toward Rosa. Time slowed to the consistency of thick honey. Elara saw Aldrich's blade catch candlelight as he raised it high. Saw Rosa's eyes widen with shock, her body frozen by the sudden assault. Saw the warriors who should have intercepted him too far away, too engaged with other threats, too slow. She did not think, did not plan, did not weigh consequences or calculate odds. She simply moved. Her body placed itself between Aldrich's blade and the woman who had become her mother in every way that mattered. She felt the impact before she felt the pain, the knife sinking into her shoulder with a sound like tearing silk. Pain exploded through her, white-hot and all-consuming. But she did not fall. She stood her ground, placing her body between the monster and his intended victim, blood soaking into her silver gown as she stared into Aldrich's shocked face. "No," she said, and her voice was steel. "Not her. Not ever." Kalen's roar shook the very foundations of the palace. He crossed the distance between them in 3 massive strides, his face transformed into something beyond human, beyond wolf, into pure primal rage. His hand closed around Aldrich's throat, lifting the counselor off his feet as if he weighed nothing at all. "You dare," Kalen snarled, and his voice was thunder and earthquake, in the end of all things. "You dare touch what is mine." Aldrich clawed at the hand, crushing his windpipe, his face purpling, his eyes bulging with terror. The sword fell from his fingers, clattering against marble floor. Around them, the battle was ending, rogues falling or surrendering as they realized their cause was lost. But Kalen saw none of it. His world had narrowed to the man who had hurt Elara, who had threatened his mother, who had betrayed everything he was sworn to protect. One squeeze. That was all it would take. One flex of his fingers, and Aldrich Mercer would trouble them no more. "Kalen." Alara's voice cut through his rage, weak but determined. She pressed one hand against her wound, blood seeping between her fingers, but her eyes remained fixed on his face. "Justice, not revenge." He looked at her, at the woman who had taken a blade meant for his mother, at the Omega from a small village who had more courage than warriors twice her size, at his mate bleeding and pale but still standing. "He deserves death," Kalen growled. "Yes, but not like this." Elara stepped closer, each step costing her visibly. "Not in rage, not without trial. That is not who you are. That is not who I fell in love with." The moment stretched between them, heavy with consequence. Kalen's hand trembled around Aldrich's throat. The wolf within him howled for blood, for justice delivered by tooth and claw. But Alara's eyes held him, anchored him, reminded him of who he wanted to be. His grip loosened. "Brennan," Kalen commanded, his voice rough with the effort of restraint, "take this traitor to the dungeons. He will face justice before the full assembly." Brennan appeared immediately, guards at his side. They dragged Aldrich away, the former counselor still gasping for breath, still staring at Rosa with hatred that had festered for decades. Kalen caught Elara as her legs finally gave way. "Healer," he roared, cradling her against his chest. "Get me a healer now." Elara looked up at him through a haze of pain, managing a weak smile. "I told you we would survive this. You are bleeding. You took a blade from my mother. This is not surviving. I am still breathing. Everything else is details." Despite everything, despite the blood and the chaos and the terror still receding, Kalen laughed. The sound was broken, a half-sob but genuine. "You are impossible," he said. "You love me anyway." "God help me, I do." The healer stitched Alara's wound while she gritted her teeth and refused to cry out. The blade had been meant for Rosa's heart, but had caught Alara's shoulder instead. Deep enough to be serious, shallow enough to heal cleanly. A scar would remain, the healer said. A permanent reminder of this night. Alara did not mind. Scars told stories. This one would tell a story of love and courage, and the moment she proved that some things were worth bleeding for. Kalen stayed with her through all of it, holding her hand, while the healer worked his face a mask of controlled anguish. When the last bandage was secured and the healer finally departed, he gathered her in his arms with desperate gentleness. "Do not ever do that again," he said against her hair. "My heart stopped when I saw that blade. I thought I had lost you before I truly had you." I could not let him hurt her. Alara pressed her face into his chest, breathing in his scent of smoke and pine, and something uniquely him. "She is my family, you both are, and you are ours." Rosa's voice came from the doorway. The Queen Mother stood with Brennan's support, her face wet with tears, but her spine straight with the pride that had never truly left her. "What you did tonight, Alara, there are no words. There are three." Alara lifted her head, meeting Rosa's eyes. "You are welcome." Rosa crossed the room and embraced them both, the three of them, holding each other in the aftermath of horror and triumph. A family forged not by blood, but by choice, by courage, by love, that had been tested in fire and emerged stronger. "It is over," Rosa whispered. "Truly over." But Kalen's jaw was set with grim determination. "Not yet. Aldrich must face justice. His conspirators must be exposed. The truth of what he did must be known." "Then we tell them," Alara said simply. "All of them. Everything." The trial of Lord Aldrich Mercer took place 3 days later. The great hall that had hosted celebration and battle now served as courtroom. Wolves from every territory filled the space, their faces grave with the weight of what they were about to witness. At the center, bound in chains that had held worse monsters than him, Aldrich stood before the judgment of his kingdom. Kalen presided from the high seat, his face carved from stone, his eyes revealing nothing. Rosa sat at his right hand, her presence a silent condemnation of the man who had tried to destroy her. And at Kalen's left shoulder, bandaged beneath a gown of midnight blue, sat Alara. The evidence was presented with methodical precision. Rosa's testimony of that night 3 years ago. The letters found in Aldrich's chambers, detailing his communications with rogue forces. The confessions of his co-conspirators extracted through questioning that Alara did not want to imagine. And finally, the most damning revelation of all. "He killed my father," Kalen announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent hall. "Poison administered over months designed to look like natural decline. The former Alphaking did not die of illness. He was murdered by a man he trusted with his life." The gasps that rippled through the crowd were like waves breaking on shore. Aldrich, who had maintained defiant silence through all other accusations, finally spoke. "She should have chosen me." His voice was a rasp stripped of all pretense. "Rosalind should have been mine. I loved her before your father ever saw her. I would have given her everything. But she rejected me, chose another, and then she had the audacity to be happy." His eyes found boredom, and decades of festered resentment burned in their depths. "So I took what mattered to her, her husband, her freedom, her son's peace. If I could not have her love, I would have her suffering instead." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Rosa stood, and her voice rang clear and strong through the hall. "You speak of love, but you know nothing of it. Love does not destroy what it cannot possess. Love does not poison and plot and scheme. Love does not hire rogues to murder and kidnap and terrorize." She looked at him with something beyond hatred, beyond anger, with the pitying contempt reserved for creatures too broken to understand their own disease. "What you feel is not love, Aldrich. It is obsession dressed in love's clothing, and it has consumed you until nothing remains but ash." Aldrich's face contorted with rage, but the chains held him fast. Kalen rose, and the weight of his authority settled over the hall like a physical force. "Lord Aldrich Mercer, for the murder of Alpha King Ronan Ironvale, for the attempted murder of Queen Mother Rosalind Ironvale, for conspiracy with rogue forces against this kingdom, for treason against the crown and people you were sworn to serve. His voice was iron and ice and the finality of mountains. You are sentenced to death. May whatever gods you believe in have more mercy than you deserve. Guards dragged Aldrich away, his screams of protest echoing off stone walls until silence finally returned. It was over. Truly, finally over. 6 months later, spring had come to Shadow Peak. Snow retreated from the lower peaks, revealing meadows of wildflowers that painted the mountains in colors no artist could capture. The palace itself seemed to breathe easier, shadows lifted by the exposure and punishment of those who had lurked within them. Alara stood before a mirror in the queen's chambers, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. The silver gown she wore had been designed specifically for this day, its fabric catching light like moonbeams trapped in silk. Her hair had been arranged in an elaborate style that incorporated small flowers from the mountain meadows. The scar on her shoulder, visible above the gown's neckline, caught the light like a badge of honor. "You are breathtaking," Rosa said from behind her, adjusting a final pin in Alara's hair. The Queen Mother had fully recovered her memory, complete her spirit undimmed by everything she had endured. "My son is the luckiest man in all the territories. I think I might be the lucky one. You are both lucky. That is how it should be." Rosa turned Alara to face her hands on her shoulders. "I never had a daughter, but if I had, I would have wanted her to be exactly like you. Strong, kind, brave enough to take a blade for an old woman she had known only a few months." "You are family," Alara said simply. "That is what family does." "Yes, it is." The ceremony took place in the Great Hall, transformed once again, but for far different purpose. Flowers replaced ice sculptures. Joy replaced tension. The wolves who filled the space came not in wariness, but in celebration, witnessing the union of their king and the woman who had earned her place beside him. Kalen waited at the altar, dressed in formal black, his dark hair pulled back to reveal the sharp planes of his face. When Alara appeared at the entrance of the hall, his expression transformed into something that made her heart stop and restart in a single breath. Wonder, adoration, the look of a man who had found something he never dared hope existed. She walked toward him through a sea of watching eyes, but she saw only him, the man who had knelt before his mother and wept without shame, the king who had chosen justice over revenge, the mate who had given her space to find her own way to him. "You came," he said, as she reached him, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I will always come, every day, every moment, for the rest of our lives." The ceremony itself was ancient in beautiful words spoken in the old tongue that bound their souls as surely as the bond already singing between them. But the moment that mattered came after, when Kalen took her hands and spoke vows that were entirely his own. "I do not claim you because destiny demands it," he said, and his voice carried to every corner of the hall. "I choose you because of who you are. I choose your strength, your compassion, your courage. I choose the woman who saved my mother when no one else would, who stood between her and a blade without hesitation, who saw the man beneath the crown and wanted him anyway." His eyes glistened, and he did not try to hide it. "I choose you, Alara, today and every day, in this life and whatever comes after." Alara's own vows came through tears she did not try to stop. "I spent my whole life running from bonds, believing they could only diminish and destroy. You showed me I was wrong." She squeezed his hands, feeling the strength in them, the gentleness beneath the power. "You gave me choice when everyone else offered only destiny. You saw me as a partner when others would have seen property. You taught me that love does not have to be chains. It can be wings." She smiled through her tears. "I choose you, Kalen, not because I have to, because I want to, because there is no life worth living that does not have you in it." When they kissed, the hall erupted in cheers, but neither of them heard it. They were lost in each other, in the promise of a future they would build together, in the certainty that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The years that followed were kinder than those that came before. Alara established her healing centers across the territories, training Omegas in the arts of medicine and service. What had begun as a dream, shared over firelight, became reality. A network of healers who served all wolves regardless of status. A system that valued life over hierarchy. a legacy that would outlast them both. Kaelin's reforms transformed the kingdom from the inside out. Laws that had treated Omegas as property were struck down, replaced by protections that ensured choice and dignity. Councils that had excluded anyone without alpha blood were open to all who had wisdom to offer. The Shadow Wolf remained fearsome to enemies, but his own people learned to see the man beneath the legend. Rosa lived to see her grandchildren born. Twins, a boy and a girl, with their father's dark hair and their mother's bright eyes. She held them in her arms on the day of their birth, tears of joy streaming down her weathered face, and whispered stories of courage and kindness into their tiny ears. "Your mother saved my life," she told them, though they were too young to understand. "When I was lost and alone, and everyone else walked past, she stopped. She chose kindness over convenience, compassion over self-interest. That is why she is queen, not because of who she married, but because of who she is." When Rosa finally passed, it was peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by those who loved her. The kingdom mourned their queen mother, but the grief was tempered by gratitude for the years they had been given. Alara spoke at her funeral, voice steady despite the tears that fell. "She taught me that sometimes being lost is how we find our way home. That kindness to strangers can change everything. That family is not always blood, but always choice." She looked at Kaelin, at their children, at the sea of faces gathered to honor a woman who had touched so many lives. "Rosa Ironveil chose me when she had every reason to be wary. She trusted me with her care and eventually with her son's heart. I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that trust." That night, standing on the balcony of their chambers, Alara and Kaelin watched stars emerge over the mountains. The kingdom spread below them, peaceful and thriving, transformed by their joined vision. "Do you ever regret it?" Kaelin asked, his arm around her waist, her head resting against his shoulder. "Missing that mating ceremony all those years ago?" Ilara considered the question, remembered standing at her cottage window, watching everyone else chase destiny while she turned away. Remembered finding an old woman by a fountain, confused and afraid, and desperately alone. "No," she said finally, "not even for a moment. That night I did not find a mate. I found something better." "What?" "Your mother." She looked up at him, at the man who had become her entire world. "And through her I found you. I found family. I found home." She smiled and reaching up to touch his face. "If I could go back and choose again, I would still walk past that ceremony. I would still stop at that fountain. I would still wrap my shawl around a stranger's shoulders and say, 'You are safe now.'" Kaelin kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "That is why you are the perfect queen, because you would choose kindness over destiny every single time. And you are the perfect king, because you would let me make that choice." They stood together in the starlight, two souls who had found each other against all odds. Not because fate demanded it, but because they had both been brave enough to choose love over fear. Behind them, the palace hummed with life. Their children slept peacefully in the nursery. Their kingdom prospered under fair rule. Their legacy grew with each passing day. And in the distance, if you listened carefully, you could hear it. The sound of hope flowering, of chains breaking, of hearts once lost and lonely finally finding their way home. Together.